there is a diverse, wide array of perspectives making films, telling their personal stories from their personal perspectives with their individual identities. I think that it's just going to naturally become more interesting and stop being really about like women making films and just being people making interesting film.
Women in horror have gone together since as far back as Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, all the way to the dawn of the Scream Queen. Pretty likely, a lot of your favorite titles in the genre had women involved as writers, producers, directors, and the final girls themselves. So why is it the industry has been so slow to support the ideas behind these storytellers and directors, especially since women are the biggest consumers of the genre? Trigger warning, a lot of heavy subjects are discussed, including assault and rape.
So I just watched Bleed before this, but I want to ask, how did all of you meet each other? How did all of you come to know each other and form a collective?
I always feel like there's no simple way to answer this question, but like a few of us knew a few of us in like different branches of our lives, and we were all kind of doing different things. Mm-hmm. I knew that Tasha was an actress who was also a filmmaker. Danin and I had worked together on photos, and Franju was doing production design. We were all doing our different like cool, obviously Megan is an actress and a writer, cool creative things. And we realized together that we wanted to create horror and we needed to generate some opportunity for ourselves. So we thought we would join forces to try and do that.
So in watching Bleed, I saw you all had wildly different aesthetics, all fantastic. What are all of each of your different aesthetic influences in horror?
I feel like my influences are pretty sound. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of like early 2000s slasher horror is definitely like where I come from and mm-hmm. what I really love. And those earlier formats, I think, are like the foundation for the horror that I really enjoy.
I feel like my tastes are changing, so this answer is changing. But Guillermo del Toro is definitely like an OG influence for sure. Also Lynn Ramsey, I'm just obsessed with Lynn Ramsey.
I like all the weirdo, offbeat, super indie stuff. Like one of my favorite movies is a French movie from the mid 2000s called Evolution about women who turn boys into starfish. Like I just love that. I like social satire and I like weird body horror. Those are my two like main vibes. So like I love Get Out. I'm obsessed with Jordan Peele. I love the movie Cam. I love anything David Cronenberg. Like I made a short for a horror film competition once, and one of my friends described it as if David Cronenberg directed a perfume commercial, and I was like, yes.
Oh my God.
That's all I want in my life, like pretty and gross, and like it says something.
My segment was Boxed, and I think I was influenced a lot by Eyes Without a Face, which is an older film but has kind of this like weird, creepy feel from like another perspective, a really early version of that. Like we see a lot of that now where you're like behind a bush and the camera's really jumpy, but like it was kind of an early version of that because it was like this like view behind this mask and it's this woman that's like kind of trapped. Oh no, a cat in the background.
Oh no, that's Kyle. That's Kyle, and she demands that she be given praise.
We were trying to steal that. Sorry about that. It's horrible.
Oh no, you're good. She's gonna steal a lot of moments from me. I feel like I've met most of the women in my life. Oh my God, the cat's pulling at my sweater. No, I feel like most of the women that I've met and made friends with, I've met through loving horror. Women consume so much horror media. Why do you feel we're drawn to it?
I'm sure everybody has their own reason. But I think one thing we all kind of have in common is a love of being triggered. Mm-hmm. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've texted these gals and was like, this triggered the hell out of me. And I was like, ooh, let me watch. Mm-hmm. Like, I think there's something in seeing traumatic experiences, at least for me, reimagined through like a fantastical lens that makes me feel like safe to process it, but also like seen in the horror of it. If that makes sense.
You know, for myself, growing up, watching horror, while there weren't a lot of brown girl leads, there were still a lot of women leads and a lot of strong women in horror. And it was one of the only genres you could find that in. So I just kept coming back.
Yeah, I don't know if the reason that I'm drawn to horror, I don't know how much it's connected to my womanhood, although I am well aware that the majority of the horror audience is female. But I personally like It's just the best form of escapism to me, to see something happening to someone that's so much worse than anything that I'm going through in my life. It's cathartic, and it's like just a reminder that my life is okay.
I personally hate like romantic comedies. They really stress me out because like my apartment will never be that nice. Like my love life will never be that easy. I'll never have that big of a closet of shoes. But like in a horror movie, when I leave, I'm like, oh, I'm not being chased by ghost demons.
Yeah.
And I feel like better about myself. And like what Frenchie said too about strong women who get to do stuff on screen other than fall in love and complain about their looks and have a makeover. Not like that's every other thing, but for me, I think the most interesting journeys for heroines are in horror.
It's the only place you see women with power tools.
Yeah.
I just love the conversations you can have within the horror genre. Like you can just talk about anything. So much horror that like, yes, has like a face value and a surface of like blood and guts and like the kills and it's fun. But usually like the next layer down, there's a conversation about something going on in society, something going on, like there are lots of conversations about things that happen to women specifically, even like before that was like so intentional, you know, it just kind of came out with like the like rape revenge films and with slasher films and with The Final Girl and how that relates to men actually, you know, there's just so much conversation that happens in horror that you can either like analyze and really dig into, or you can just kind of feel it and you know that you're experiencing something that's a little different and a different conversation. Whereas in other genres, if you try to have conversations about difficult things, sometimes if you don't get it exactly right, you're screwed.
Yeah, actually this year, upon my like 30th something rewatch of Black Christmas, I realized it was maybe the only movie that set up a woman that was trying to have an abortion as not a villain that I can think of like anything for quite some time, where it portrayed her boyfriend as a maniac for trying to even get in the way of that decision. And that was in the 70s, and anything that tries to do it now is so much more clumsy.
Yes, totally.
When was the first time you specifically saw yourself in a horror movie?
It's not a horror movie, but it was a genre series. I don't know if anybody remembers Dark Angel starring Jessica Alba. So that came out when I was in high school, and I was like, oh my God, for the first time I see somebody on screen who looks like me. I'm not Jessica Alba, but I was like, she's got brown skin and like a round face and a snub nose and like not angled features. And it wasn't a thing because she was also like a cyborg who kicked ass. So for me, that was huge because I was like, oh, like I could be the center of this story.
I think for me, it was The Craft. I think it had to have been The Craft. That was the first time I saw like goth girls on screen and identified with them, I suppose.
What is it about horror specifically as a genre that you think is such a good vehicle for talking about the experience of being a woman?
I think that a lot of like the womanhood experiences are pretty parallel to horror. Like, you know, the things that make us women is bleeding, or, you know, not inherently, but people's with vaginas. And when you give birth, you know, that's kind of a traumatic experience as well. And then there's like this whole medical history of women being ignored, or, you know, their needs being exploited to keep them captive, things happening. These are like parallels that are explored constantly in the horror genre, and we're dissecting those over and over again because they're interesting.
We all know that being a woman is just like, there is a degree of fear that inherently exists with just living as a woman. If you walk outside, you are trained from a very young age to be aware that there are people out there who want to harm your body. Like that's just a thing that you just live with in the world. And so, yeah, it makes sense that that would translate to exploring what that horror is like in all different ways within the genre.
And I think also there's an element of catharsis and fantasy, right? We live in a male-dominated society. It's just like what it is. That's why we founded this group, because there's not a lot. It's changing, but there's not enough female directors in horror. And so I think that, like, you know, in real life, if you get sexually assaulted or attacked by a man, it's like maybe the police will listen to you. Like there is no justice really. But in a genre movie, that same event can happen and that character can like pick up a chainsaw and slice the shit out of him, or turn into a monster and avenge herself. So I think that there's like a way that the like fantastical constructs of it allow us to imagine ourselves as aggressors in a way that is not as often or can really happen in the real world.
Being scared frivolously can be a gift. Being afraid where there's no actual consequence is one of the greatest pleasures you can give yourself, because then that means that there wasn't something actually terrifying there, and it's just, God, what was the term I heard? Bourgeoisie fear. What are some of the things specifically in horror that scares you? What are one of the things where you know if it's in a movie that's going to be something that particularly eeks you?
I'm so scared of sharks. I'm like so scared of sharks. I don't know why. Underwater completely scares me. Sharks scare me. Orcas are the worst. There is an orca horror movie, believe it or not.
She yelled at me for sending her a music video that had an orca the other day. She's not.
It's like, it's the fear of being surrounded by like the big unknown, I guess.
I hate this about myself, but I love supernatural stuff. That always gets me. And the reason I hate it is because it's like, come on, like, you know, it's not real. So why does that scare you the most? For some reason, it's the fake stuff that I know very well is completely fake that gets me.
I fucking hate space, like not aliens, like space. Like I will never go to space because always goes wrong in space. Kind of like Danin's, like you can't escape space or hell, or like the same way like being trapped in a dream within a dream really fucks me up, because I'm like, but how do you wake up?
Mine is just stuff you can't see. So like ghosty boys, but you never see them. So like Paranormal Activity, like when that came out, I couldn't watch the trailer. You know, like this closet here, I don't like it. I wish it wasn't there.
Just watching it swing open in the background.
I'm at all times expecting it to creak open, you know?
I feel like so much of horror, even though I love it, is made for men and by men. How do you take this thing as an influence that's usually geared towards, unfortunately, like not you, but inject you into it?
I personally just pretend I'm a man.
I just don't think about them. I just make what I want to make.
All of cinema right now is trying to explore like what the female lens really is. And like, you know, there was like a little like time period where that people were talking about that as the opposite of the male lens. So that then you just like flip everything, and that's not true to life. Like, it's not that like women, if you look at the female lens, women want to rape men. Like, that's just not how it is, you know? Yeah. So we're kind of finding, because there are more films and because there are more films made by women, it's kind of a slower change than it ought to be, because we're so used to telling perspectives through a male perspective that like, as we start to tell stories, even though you feel it as a female, you're like, oh, well, the structure that I've seen goes ABC. So I should take what I'm thinking and put it in that structure that I've witnessed so many times through film. And that's a structure that's like been designed by men. And it's a little, I think it's really interesting, and it's a little like sloppy right now, and it's a little like variable, and it's cool to see that the stories that are like made by women are really starting to show an actual female perspective, and not just the opposite, and not just trying to fit into a male structure that already exists. And like some of the films that are coming out as a result are so cool and like break structure in a new way. And like, I think we've all recently watched like Promising Young Woman. It's like a whole different kind of a structure that like sort of fits into the structures we've seen before. But I feel like part of that comes from like how women experience the world and how that lens is different. And She Dies Tomorrow, like they're just different. Like they're like the films that are coming out now by women are really breaking the same structure that we've seen. And that's like what it's about. Like really finding that real perspective of women is like what it's about as being a female filmmaker right now, I think.
I also think that there's a difference between films made by like men and the male gaze of movies. For example, the movie Us, against Jordan Peele. I remember there was a scene where Lupita Nyong'o was on the beach and she was in a bathing suit, but she had a towel wrapped around her waist and it was a behind shot. And like, I've seen other movies like that where the camera is like up the butt, and none of that. She had none of that. She had a towel wrapped around her waist and a swimsuit on, and she's just like a beautiful woman hanging out on the beach, which is what she would look like. And then later on in the movie, Winston Duke, he's lying on his bed with his like thighs out and like his man thighs out, and the camera is like is like eye level. And I was like, way to capture like a female gay. And he wasn't conventionally six-pack hot, because I don't like, as a woman, I don't care about that. I was like, ooh, here's this sexy, confident man looking comfortable, like, gimme. You know what I mean? So I think it's like, for me, it's looking at movies and how they're looking at what they're filming and figuring out, like, is this like reinforcing the idea that women are objects to be admired, or is it like granting personhood to the subject, like, in a way that we haven't seen before?
It really is just about having a wider variety of voices, because if you only have 3 women who are allowed to make movies, then of course there's going to be this inherent like need to fit into the mold of what it is. Like Tasha was saying, being reactionary to the male gaze and trying to, you know, do the opposite of that. But if there is a diverse, wide array of perspectives making films, telling their personal stories from their personal perspectives with their individual identities, I think that it's just going to naturally become more interesting and stop being really about like women making films and just being people making interesting films.
I have a stepdaughter, she's 8, and so she just watched her first horror movie last week, which was Paranormal Activity 1. So this week we watched her second horror movie, which was Paranormal Activity 2. The movie starts and, you know, they have Martine, who is the housekeeper, who's helping, I think, with the new baby. And she's like, oh, they're Mexican. You know, my stepdaughter is half Mexican. And then I didn't say anything, but maybe like 20 more minutes in, she's like, oh, is she just the maid? And like, that's pretty crushing, you know, I had to explain to her, I was like, you know, it's kind of bullshit. This is in Carlsbad, where there are a lot of well-to-do Mexican families that have these bigger houses. This is like not an accurate depiction of what's happening. This is just how they showed it at the time. Horror's always given us female leads that are strong, but we're still waiting on a few perspectives, because there was even like in the paranormal universe, there is like the Martine's family. We explore it. So you do see that perspective more, but that one got what, 1/3 of the budget?
Yeah.
Right? And no one knows that one. Who's seen that one?
Really love that question, and you for pointing that out, because all of a sudden I just sat here in my head and I was like, when was the first time I saw a Guatemalan woman on a movie as a child? And I was like, oh, it was the maid in Clueless.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and then immediately after we watched Volcano, which shows Los Angeles, right? That's an LA love letter. And the only Hispanics in that movie are the people protesting that, how are we going to get to work to clean your houses if you shut down the subway? And then at the end of the movie are the people in the back of the restaurant at the Hard Rock Cafe. And that's it.
Wow.
And these are LA city workers. My parents in the 90s were LA city workers, and my dad is not white. So where's this representation here? Because that's not what LA city workers even look like. And we're growing and evolving, but again, it goes back to like telling authentic stories. If you get more brown people behind the lens, you're gonna get more brown people in front of it.
Yeah, that's why it took us so long to get a good Llorona story.
Yeah. And even then there's some complications, but
past or present, what were some women in horror that like definitely you drew inspiration or influence from?
For me, I think Jennifer's Body came at a really pivotal time. I think I was the right age when that came out, and it was like super influential. And then for me personally, that was like absolutely the style of movie I like. You know, I like exploring younger people and having fun with it. And I think Jennifer's Body is like a real good embodiment of fun in horror. A little queer coded, it's interesting, that movie. And then so that one was pretty influential. All the women involved in that, clearly.
When I was coming up, you couldn't do both things. They were like, you can only, like, if you're a writer, like, God forbid you try to be in front of the camera or direct. You know, like, there was this big taboo. But I think nowadays it's becoming more accepted to be like, I'm good at a lot of things, just like Ben Affleck is good at a lot but arguably good at a lot of, but but the freedom to kind of move through your creativity in like whatever phase is most inspiring to you at the time, I think is just so awesome.
To be all of it if you want to, or to be some of it if you want to, and to be good at the things that you're good at and not be mad that you're good at those things because you also like doing something else. Like, I don't want to direct because I want to only focus on acting and I won't be taken seriously. So like Emerald Fennell is like a hero from that perspective, and like Phoebe Waller-Bridge is a hero from that perspective. Taika Waititi is a hero from that perspective, and as a man, but just people who I'm starting to see do different things and not be afraid about that is really inspiring. And that inspires me just as a woman, because I feel like women are pigeonholed into certain areas. And when I see men and women break through the boxes and break through where they might be pigeonholed, like that's inspiring to me as a whole person.
The ability to be like taken seriously as a iconoclast is something that I don't think was ever available to women, especially in horror, because it's like you take a shirt off and you die. That's your job. Like you look cute and you die. That's your job. The idea that the person taking her shirt off could also be like thinking about how it looks on the camera and filming it is like too empowered and self-aware for people to get behind. They like don't know how to take your acting seriously or your filmmaking seriously if you're doing both. Totally. So I think that's starting to change, but there is this idea that like, for years I was like, yeah, I want to be like in horror, I want to take my shirt off and also be the one filming it. To be in charge of your own representation is I think the next step.
I remember like a decade ago, I was auditioning for a movie and there was an exec who had gotten me the audition and he was like, don't talk about your music. They don't want to know that you do other things. And then like, when it came time when I realized I wanted to direct, it took me longer to begin than I would have, because I was like, well, people aren't going to like believe me doing this because I've been a performer always. Like they're not going to respect me. And it did take a minute for some of the people, the men in my life, to not scoff at me when I told them I was becoming a filmmaker. It's a real thing.
Tell me a little bit about what you all collectively decided was the common thesis for Bleed.
So Bleed is basically the culmination of the modern woman's experience, told through the lens of horror. So that's really what brought us together. And that was kind of each of our individual missions already. And so when we came together and made our stories, that thread really came out naturally. So mine was Buffalo Bill, which is the copycat horror.
Yeah.
Like such a fun phenomenon that's been explored over and over again. But with the advent of social media, it's like become more and more prevalent and it's happening faster. So it's interesting to explore and see.
The Safe Space, which was the one that I directed and also was in, and that was exploring something that it was really honestly inspired by Facebook groups. Because
that's what I got from it.
I've been in a number of groups for women on Facebook that are ostensibly support groups, and then if somebody like defies what there's the expectation, or maybe has a question about a particular leader of the group, then they get kind of crucified, and that is something that I found myself being more afraid of the people in the Facebook groups than I was of the thing that the Facebook group was trying to fight at certain points, just because there were leaders in charge who like sort of abused their power. And it sounds so funny because it's on Facebook. It shouldn't matter, but it is kind of terrifying.
Mine is very body dysmorphia, pressures to follow beauty tutorials realm.
I loved Subscribe. I just, the colors of it were amazing. Just the combination of both the colors and also just the idea of the person behind the screen suddenly becoming this like distorted monster is such a blast.
That's how I feel when I watch makeup tutorials.
We're like obsessed with like, real true crime, and a lot of true crime happens to revolve around like serial killers. One thing I listened to that really like hit me was an interview with somebody who had survived and had been raped, and it was a live camera shot of the police interview, and the police officer was a woman, and she was saying like things like, well, how late did you come home? What were you wearing? And I was like, is that really true? And, you know, I could see this woman who was being interviewed, you know, answering kind of these questions that were questions like pointed at it being her fault, that this serial rapist had gone after her, but it was her fault somehow. And I could just see her experiencing like that self-doubt and questioning and like self-blaming. And, you know, it's just kind of this exploring this like thing where you're this strong, independent woman, but yet it's your fault. Like, you shouldn't have been strong, independent woman. You shouldn't have been single. You shouldn't have had your own apartment. And what were you wearing? Oh, you put on your little nightgown. That's your fault. It's a real kind of vague exploration of like what I feel when I look at some of that from our past history and from now. I mean, things happen now. Somebody like, you know, somebody already used this as an example, but like, you can still call the police and say like, hey, I need help. Something bad's happened to me. Maybe I've been raped, and still not get the help that you need. So just kind of this weird mentality that we have as a society. So just kind of exploring that and exploring a really big idea in a little pocket.
Honestly, I was just like, ASMR is creepy. I was like, this is so creepy. I hate it. I'm not soothed by it. I hate it. I was like, all right, it's going to star a lady. I was supposed to act in it. Thank God I didn't. It would have been impossible. I know Bria Grant, who stars in it, is going to nail it. So I had planned to write her ASMR monologue as like very self-hating about my own body. Cause I was like, I can talk shit about like, you're so fat, for example. That's one self-hating thought that can run through my head. And then when it wasn't going to be me, I was like, I have to be nicer to this actress than I would be to myself. I can't like make fun of her body or her age. Those are all the things I was going to go to. So I was like, oh God, like I was forced to get creative. And then I was like, what's like the most disturbing swear word I could say? And I was like, ooh. So I was like, and I texted these girls. I was like, is that too far? And they were like, no, it's perfect. So then I like kind of entered the stream of consciousness and, you know, did this monologue with the guy. And then it came out and I was like, oh, does somebody suffer from depression and anxiety? And did that sneak its way into this little film? It sure did. So like, it was like after the fact that I realized I was making actually more of a comment that I had intended to make, which was just like, ASMR is fucked up and I can like achieve this goal. So I don't think I'm always like aware of my message behind something when I'm creating it. I love to surprise myself after the fact.
I have everybody's shorts memorized. I know all of the lines, but Megan's in particular is burned into my brain for all of time.
Same.
It's here forever. I love ASMR, but it makes my husband crazy because he has misophonia. I have never seen him run from a room like that. Loves horror.
I laughed at it, but I was going to add, what a compliment. Thank you.
What are you all working on together, whether it be as a collective, or I know that's a little bit trickier now that we're in quarantine and kind of relearning how we make things?
Well, we got a feature coming. We got a feature anthology, baby. We're looking for a couple more ladies, and I'm very excited about it.
The idea is that the feature will be more of what you know and love, but instead of each of us having a 2-minute short, we have a 10-minute short. And again, we are looking for more women of color filmmakers to collaborate with. So if you're watching, DM us. Part of why we formed Fatale is not just to advance our own careers, but to lift up other people like us at the same time.
Everyone, Tasha just shot a thing on Super 8 by herself in the desert. Like, everyone is
Hot
all
damn.
stuff. Yeah. And I have a podcast.
Lola has a podcast called Trust Me Podcast about cults. Right? Is it about, it's about interviewing survivors.
Yeah.
Interviewing survivors of the Lola experience.
Yeah, I think everything that we're all doing, like, really, it connects to horror. Because, I mean, if cults don't connect to horror, I don't know what does. That's maybe the most real life, definitely in the top 3 most real life horrific possibilities. Fatale Collective is going to be coming out on Screambox in the next week, which is really exciting. So our, we had a really cool festival run. I don't think we mentioned that here. We had an awesome festival run. We were at Fantastic Fest, and we were at Fright Fest in Glasgow. We just had so much fun, and it was so fun when we could go in real life and interact with everyone else who is part of the horror community. And it's been also fun virtually, but I can't wait till we can go to film festivals again.
And if you like lady horror, may I recommend the episode of CW's 2-Sentence Horror Stories that I wrote. It is body horror, social satire set in a nail salon. Another thing I think is really gross and don't understand. So.
Same! Oh my god! I'm mostly just curious about, from myself, as just like a woman that is a fan of horror, because I feel like I can't say that I love it in dominated spaces without having like my card checked, essentially. Or a question that I feel like men never get, but I get like once a week. How do you love horror even though it feels misogynistic, even though, like, spoiler alert, the world is?
How do you deal with that only in this genre?
Yeah. Even though it's usually everything. But my question is, what is your rebuttal to that ridiculous question?
What exists in the world that doesn't have its roots in misogyny? Like, there is literally nothing. So, I mean, and horror is changing. It's changing rapidly. It's been changing. And even if it wasn't changing, we would still be allowed to like whatever the we want to like. Like, it's not up to them to determine whether something is or is not too misogynistic for a woman to like. That's the whole thing about being a human being, is that you can like whatever you want to like. I see that it's been changing. I see the potential. I see where it's going. I intend to be part of that future of horror. One of the reasons I'm so passionate about it is because I want to be a part of that change.
Like, that's ignoring the deep and wide tradition of final girls in horror movies, where often there is only one person left and she's a woman and she has managed to survive and often kills the killer. Right. So there's that. And then, like, side by side is, well, I'm sorry, did you not take her seriously as a heroine because she took her shirt off? Isn't that slut shaming on your part? Like, why can't we have women who have sex and are bad people and take their shirts off and do all of that? Is that inherently misogynistic to show a woman as sexual on screen? Like, I don't think so. But a lot of people assign that to the genre. Whereas, like, if you're, like, I don't know, naked in a French film, it's like high art or whatever. Like, that's a question that to me exposes the misogyny of the asker.
Thank you so much for your time. You're all fantastic. It was great getting to know you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Okay. Hey. Thank you. Okay.